In the depths of the ancient seas, beneath waves that churned with primordial chaos, there dwelled a creature so massive, so terrifying, so utterly beyond human comprehension that its very existence challenged the order of creation itself. This was Leviathan, the great sea serpent, the twisted dragon of the deep, a monster so powerful that only God himself could hope to control it. This is the story of Leviathan, a creature that appears in the Bible, in ancient mythology, and in the darkest nightmares of sailors and scholars alike. The name Leviathan comes from the Hebrew word Leviathan, which means twisted or coiled, a fitting description for a serpentine monster of unimaginable size. But Leviathan is far more than just a sea monster. It represents chaos itself, the untamed forces of nature that existed before creation, the primordial waters that God had to subdue in order to bring order to the universe. To understand Leviathan, we must journey back to the very beginning, to the moment when God separated the waters and brought forth dry land. In the book of Genesis, we are told that in the beginning, the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. The Hebrew word for this deep is tehom, which refers to the chaotic primordial ocean that existed before creation. This was not merely water as we understand it, but a representation of chaos, disorder, and the absence of divine order. And in these chaotic waters, according to ancient Near Eastern mythology that influenced biblical texts, there dwelled great monsters, creatures of chaos that opposed the order that God sought to establish. The most detailed biblical description of Leviathan appears in the book of Job, chapters 40 and 41, where God himself describes this magnificent and terrifying creature to Job. God asks Job a series of rhetorical questions designed to humble the man and demonstrate the vast gulf between human power and divine power. "Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook?" God asks. "Or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook?" The description continues in vivid, almost poetic detail. Leviathan's scales are described as his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One scale is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another, they stick together and cannot be separated. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go burning torches, and sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke, as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. This is no ordinary sea creature. This is a dragon, a fire-breathing monster of such power that the text declares, "Upon earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. He beholds everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride." Leviathan is portrayed as invincible, unstoppable, beyond the power of any human to capture or kill. Only God possesses the power to control such a beast. But Leviathan's origins go back even further than the book of Job. Ancient Canaanite texts discovered at Ugarit, dating back to the 14th century BCE, speak of a similar creature called Lotan or Litanu, a seven-headed sea serpent that was slain by the storm god Baal. This creature represented the chaotic sea that threatened to overwhelm the ordered world. The biblical Leviathan draws heavily from these earlier mythological traditions, adapting them into the monotheistic framework of Hebrew religion. In Psalm 74, we find a reference to God crushing the heads of Leviathan in pieces and giving him as food to the creatures of the wilderness. This suggests a creation myth where God defeated the chaos monster in order to establish order in the universe. Similarly, Isaiah chapter 27 speaks of a future day when the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, Leviathan the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. The rabbinical tradition expanded greatly on the biblical accounts of Leviathan. According to the Talmud and various midrashic texts, God created Leviathan on the fifth day of creation, along with all the other sea creatures. But Leviathan was special. God created both a male and a female Leviathan, but immediately realized that if these two creatures were allowed to reproduce, their offspring would be so numerous and powerful that they would destroy the world. So God killed the female Leviathan and salted her flesh, preserving it for a great feast that would be served to the righteous in the world to come. This eschatological banquet became a significant element in Jewish apocalyptic literature. At the end of days, when the Messiah comes and the righteous are resurrected, God will prepare a great feast. The main courses of this feast will be the flesh of Leviathan, the meat of Behemoth, the great land monster, and wine that has been aging in its grapes since the 6 days of creation. The righteous will feast on these primordial creatures in a celebration of God's ultimate victory over chaos and evil. Some rabbinic texts describe Leviathan in even more fantastic terms. They say that Leviathan is so large that when he is hungry, he breathes out a heat so intense that it makes all the waters of the deep boil. When he is thirsty, he creates such turbulence in the sea that all the waters become troubled for 70 years. His eyes shine with such brightness that they illuminate the entire ocean. Some texts claim that God plays with Leviathan for 3 hours each day, a curious image that suggests even this creature of chaos has a place in God's ordered creation. In medieval Jewish mysticism, particularly in the Kabbalah, Leviathan took on additional symbolic meanings. The creature became associated with the primordial serpent, with Satan, and with the forces of evil that oppose divine order. The Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, describes Leviathan as a manifestation of the Sitra Achra, the other side, the realm of evil and impurity that exists in opposition to holiness. Christian interpretations of Leviathan varied widely. Some early church fathers saw Leviathan as a symbol of Satan or the devil, the great enemy of God, who would ultimately be defeated at the end of time. The image of God hooking Leviathan's jaw was sometimes interpreted as Christ's victory over Satan through the crucifixion and resurrection. The fishhook became the cross, and Leviathan's defeat represented the harrowing of hell and the liberation of righteous souls. In medieval bestiaries and theological texts, Leviathan was often conflated with other sea monsters and dragons. He became associated with one of the 7 deadly sins, specifically envy, in some Christian traditions. The massive creature lurking in the depths, consumed by its own twisted nature, became a symbol of the envious soul that cannot bear to see others prosper. Thomas Hobbes famously used Leviathan as the title and central metaphor of his 1651 political treatise. For Hobbes, Leviathan represented the Commonwealth, the artificial person created by the social contract, a massive entity composed of all its citizens that possessed absolute sovereignty. Hobbes chose this name deliberately, invoking the biblical image of an all-powerful creature that cannot be controlled by ordinary means, just as he argued that sovereign power must be absolute and indivisible. In popular culture, Leviathan has inspired countless interpretations, from Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which draws heavily on Leviathan imagery, to modern fantasy literature, video games, and films. The great sea serpent continues to capture human imagination. The creature represents our primal fear of the ocean's depths, of the unknown monsters that might lurk beneath the waves, of forces too powerful for humanity to control or comprehend. But what was Leviathan really? Some scholars have suggested that the biblical descriptions might be based on real animals, perhaps crocodiles or whales, exaggerated through myth and legend. The fire-breathing aspect might derive from the way crocodiles seem to steam in cold water, or from the spray that whales produce. Others argue that Leviathan is purely mythological, a literary device used to express theological truths about God's power and the nature of chaos and order. The most compelling interpretation sees Leviathan as a symbol of everything that resists divine order, everything that threatens to return creation to the chaos from which it emerged. In ancient Near Eastern cosmology, creation was not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. The forces of chaos constantly threatened to overwhelm the ordered world, and only the power of the gods kept them at bay. In the biblical tradition, this became monotheist. Only the one true God possessed the power to control Leviathan, to keep chaos in check, to maintain the order of creation. The eschatological promise that God would ultimately slay Leviathan represented the hope that chaos would be finally and permanently defeated. The world would no longer be threatened by the return to primordial disorder. The feast on Leviathan's flesh symbolized the complete victory of order over chaos, of good over evil, of God's sovereignty over all forces that oppose him. Leviathan also raises profound questions about the nature of creation and God's relationship to it. If God created Leviathan, as Genesis suggests, then chaos itself is part of the created order. God did not destroy chaos, but incorporated it into creation, keeping it under control. This suggests a more complex understanding of good and evil, order and chaos, than simple dualism. Even the monstrous has its place in God's creation, even if that place is to be ultimately defeated and transformed. In the end, Leviathan stands as one of the most powerful and enduring symbols in religious literature. This twisted serpent of the deep, this fire-breathing dragon, this king over all the sons of pride, represents everything that is wild, untamed, and terrifying in creation. It embodies the chaos that existed before order, the forces that threaten to overwhelm civilization and return the world to primordial disorder. Yet it also represents God's ultimate power, for only the Creator can control such a creature. Leviathan reminds us that there are forces in the universe far beyond human power to control, mysteries in the depths that we cannot fathom, and that our ordered world rests on God's continued victory over chaos. The great sea serpent still swims in the depths of our collective imagination, a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos, and the divine power required to maintain that boundary.